So, you're one of the British beer big boys, part of the establishment. You've been riding high for quite a while now. Cask Ale is more popular than it has been in decades. Things are starting to look up. Then came the rise of the craft beer, with new microbreweries frequently popping up, providing amazing, unique and interesting flavours. Craft beers have gained an amazing amount of traction in the beer market. What do you do to stay relevant in this new British beer industry? You evolve. You'll see a massive change in some of the biggest names in British beer. Some for better, some for worse. But the fact is, they have to change. There was no other option. Assimilate or die. It's as simple as that. Now let's start with one of the oldest operating brewing companies in Britain, Young's. Not content with staying stuck in the past, Young's has taken this market change in their stride. Just walk into one of their pubs and see for yourself. They're hip, modern, and some of the best beer gardens in England. Granted, they don't technically brew their own beers anymore. That duty now falls to Wells. But the company itself seems more dedicated to the industry than ever before. First things first, let's talk about their range. Gone are the days when Winter Warmer was their most interesting beer. Nowadays, they've made a couple of interesting choices when it comes to their range. The first one of those is a bold collaboration that came out of nowhere. It was actually one of my favourite beers they produce. I'm talking about their DNA, New World IPA, made in conjunction with none other than Dogfish Head. Loosely based upon Dogfish Head's 60-minute IPA, DNA tastes like something a world away from what Young's have been known for in the past. This brew is special, as there are actually two versions. The British version is a New World IPA, and is made using Dogfish Head's Galaxy and Simcoe hops from Delaware, while the version in America is the Old World IPA that uses British ingredients. While DNA is an amazing brew, it didn't make as much noise as Young's take on the Irish institution that is Guinness. When Young's London Stout started being put into their pubs and Guinness started to be taken out, there was an uproar amongst Guinness fanatics. They couldn't believe that their beloved brew had been usurped by Young's pinstripe glass alternative. Although the naysayers were many, Young's London Stout was a little beaut that had managed to silence the majority of them. I actually prefer it to Guinness. It's smoother, it's not as heavy, which for me is two of the reasons why I don't session drink Guinness. Overall, Young's has weathered the craft storm well, and I look forward to what other products they next bring to the market. Hops, malted barley and yeast. It's funny to think that so much can come from this random assortment of ingredients. Each week, we're going to look at one of these in a more in-depth nature. Continuing with yeast. Yeast is arguably the most important ingredient in the brewing of beer. It is the microorganism that is responsible for fermentation in beer. Yeast metabolizes the sugars extracted from grains, which produces alcohol and carbon dioxide, and thereby turns wort into beer. There are thousands of varieties and strains of yeast, even in the air. Wild yeast is floating around, ready to contaminate. Only cultivated strains of yeast should be utilised in the brewing of beer. If other yeast contaminate the beer, the results can be overcarbonisation, strange flavours, and all other kinds of fermentation peculiarities. Therefore, picking the right yeast for a desired beer is absolutely crucial. The two main varieties of yeast used for beer brewing are top fermenting yeast and bottom fermenting yeast. The names of both are descriptive of where the fermentation takes place. The top fermenting yeast is similar to the type of yeast used for the baking of bread. It is applied in the making of ales and stouts. Bottom fermenting yeast is utilised in the production of lagers.
Top fermenting yeast is named as such because most strains exhibit the tendency to fluctuate at the surface of the beer during the first few days of fermentation, after which the yeast settles to the bottom of the fermenter, while a large percentage stay in dispersion. Top fermenting yeast finds optimum performance in the temperature range of 55 to 75 degrees Fahrenheit. Lower temperatures tend to inhibit fermentation, causing the yeast to become dormant. Bottom fermenting yeast is best suited for temperature ranges between 55 and 32 degrees Fahrenheit. The process of fermentation takes substantially longer when using lager yeast. This term is often referred to as lagering. Bottom fermenting yeast, as is expected, fluctuates at the bottom of a vessel and spends most of its life cycle in the sedimentary state. Some of the lager styles made from bottom fermenting yeast are Pilsners, Marzans, Box, and even those American malt liquors. Beer that is exposed to the surrounding open air to allow natural yeast and bacteria to literally infect the beer are known as spontaneous fermented beers. One of the typical yeasts is Brettanomyces lambica strain. Beers produced in this fashion are sour, non-filtered. This brewing method has been practiced for decades in the West Flanders region of Belgium. To be honest though, getting into the whole topic of Belgian yeast could be a whole video on its own. There are so many amazing varieties and styles. It's probably best that we don't dig too deep here. Just know that these different strains are plentiful and offer some amazing flavours through their use. Belgian saisons, for example, showcase a spicy character, similar to cloves and pepper. This is largely a byproduct of yeast selection. Some saisons are actually spiced, but this doesn't have to be the case, as those characteristics are already present from the yeast. Actually, all this talk of Belgium reminds me that any of you European beer fans shouldn't miss out on the next 2 episodes of Beeriod, as they're going to be a 2-part Belgian extravaganza. Also, don't forget to check out Beeriod's spin-off show, Beeriod Brews, where this week I'll be giving you recommendations of 2 great yeast-related styles, sours and saisons. Don't miss it, and I'll see you next time for Ingredient of the Week.
I know what you're thinking. Liam, what about the big boys? The real big boys? Well, it's like Mum used to always say, if you've got nothing nice to say, don't say anything at all. Granted, they are experimenting with types of beers they produce. That's just a lazy way to cash in on the trend that craft beer started, which is to embrace new flavours and adapt tried and true classics. Now, it might seem on the outside like they're doing this. What they're really doing is changing the recipe slightly, adding a few fruity flavours, and calling it a brand new taste revelation. The only problem with that is, it's still tasteless and still bland. Okay, so what about the other big boys in the British beer scene? How have they adapted? Well, in the case of Fuller's, I think equally as well as Young's. Now, while London Pride and ESB hardly need to be pushed to be sold, I think Fuller's had the strongest cask and bottle range of the big boys. They are cask and bottle ale juggernauts. But what are the rest of their range? Bangor, Lancer and Honeydew are proper crackers in my opinion, and the rest of their range ain't half bad either. The sheer number of their beers that you can be picked up in a local supermarket says it all really. There literally is something for everyone. Unfortunately, I don't think the same can be said for mainstay Green King. They're not quite there yet. Sure, they have an adequate craft range that helps bolster up their old school products, but it's not as easily available as Fuller's, and also not quite as diverse. Of course, Green King are Green King. They're an ale institution. I just wish they'd adapt a little more. It's almost like if you're not in one of their pubs, then you barely know they're there. Where's their presence in this new beer market? Or is this just a taste of things to come? Will this market change? Will we see an eventual reshuffle of the market leaders? Will it be a case of out with the old and in with the new? Only time will tell.